Good morning, and I start by paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the land, and I respect and make acknowledgement to all those elders past and present. And I also want to acknowledge my Kiwi mates, kia ora, because I know there are some of you in the audience. Speaking of elders past and present, I also want to acknowledge Tony's work, because certainly when I was invited to take over the chair of the AITSL board, one of the things that was very appealing to me was the incredible work that he, Bill Loudon, and the board have done over the last 5 or 6 years to build an incredible base from which to work. There is no sense that I have to go back and undo things. To the contrary, it is how we build on that start. And certainly that is part of what I want to have as my message this morning, is where we go to next. There is no question, however, that AITSL needs you. Not just in terms of the consulting role, and certainly over the last couple of months I have tried to get around many states and consult with and listen with as many as I can, but also in the inaction role and in terms of having that impact. Because certainly my theme has been, if those of you who know me, is about how we can have an impact. My theme has been that we are already having an incredible impact. So it's not as if we have to dramatically change the direction of what we do. And it certainly is the theme that the best is here in Australia, all around us. So in terms of what I want to cover this morning is, in fact, to start slightly in another AITSL space. Am I still on? Yes. To start in another AITSL space, because not long ago, a few weeks ago, I was asked to give the inaugural oration for the patrons' oration here in Victoria. And you all know who that handsome inaugural patron is. And Brian has just recently written a book with Jim Spinks on the self-transforming school. And my theme that night was a challenge to AITSL members. And if you look at Brian's work over the last 20 or 30 years, and this is the 5th book in the series, is that it has also transformed dramatically. And can we take that one step further? And that one step further is that. Can we take that step and do what we do incredibly well at many of our school levels and have a self-transforming nation? And it's only going to happen by the people in this room. How we can stop just looking at how we transform our school, how we transform our schools in our neighbourhood, in our community, in our state, and really make that difference, because it's harnessing the power, as Brian says in his book about the self-transforming school, it's harnessing the power to collectively have that impact at a national level. And it means, as is the theme of this conference, being very clear as to what our purpose is. Because one of our concerns in this business, and we know this, you know this, particularly as busy school leaders, is you have 1,000 agendas that you have to attend to. If you don't get that bus timetable right and get the swimming pool cleaned, that will be the crisis of the moment. And all those things have to be done. But it's how then we can have, what is that moral purpose about what our purpose of schooling is? And I take the challenge of Minister Pine of putting students first and saying, what does that mean? And I'm sure, as you heard the Senator this morning speak about, it's not just test scores. It's developing the people of our nation, both in their future sense, but particularly of themselves, where they are now. And I'm trying to engender a group at the University of Melbourne at the moment to look at the wicked problems of growing up in the 21st century. And it's that notion that John Dewey went on about a century ago about how we actually look at our students as they are now, as citizens of the world, and not just keep waiting for them to prepare for some magical world out there, which is quite frankly dramatically transforming. And so it's about focusing on that right problem. And certainly, given Senator Ryan and Mr. Pine's arguments about engaging with the profession, school leadership and teacher education are the 3 themes I want to look at, because they are the 3 mandates for AITSL. There are 24 sectors, and when you add the teacher education, we now have to work with 48 vice-chancellors. And if you think working with 24 sector heads was fun, 48 vice-chancellors is going to be interesting about how we're then going to enact the kind of things we do. The Minister mentioned the PISA scores, and I do want to look at those, and he did them in terms of rankings. And you could easily say, oh yeah, but we can explain that because other countries have got higher. I'm sorry, Australia. We do have a problem, and a problem we should focus on. We have been consistently going down. But let's be very clear about the reasons that we're going down. And I look to the John Ainley work and the Patrick Griffith work. Over the last 12 years in this country, the majority of the reason why we're going down are our kids at our top 40%. We have more cruising kids and cruising schools than any other nation. And I put that down to an incredible obsession that we have had about standards, about achievement. And that notion that there is a continuum of achievement and all we have to do is get kids above some minimum score, because the effect of that is the kids nearer the top, that top 40%, we've said, great, we're doing a great job with them, why do we have to do more? And so when you look at that graph, you can see, I want you to look at it in terms of that top 40% of our kids, because that's what's causing that decline. Now let's look at the opposite of that. I think you should commend yourself, because you are incredibly good with that bottom 50%. Yes, you may not get them all looking like Einsteins and Madame Curies, but that is where we've had our biggest impact. And certainly, and I'm not going to do this today, but certainly if you look at Victoria in specific, the most successful region in this state over the last 6 or 7 years in terms of growth, the adding value notions, is the Western region, dramatically so. But that is not often popularised and talked about the success that schools and principals and teachers are having with that bottom. And unfortunately, we're not talking about the biggest problem facing our nation, which is our top 40%. And just doing more of the same is not going to fix it. Just being obsessed about achievement alone is not going to fix it. It's interesting when you look at the research, which has certainly driven me as a father of 4 boys who have successfully graduated from your schools, thank you very much, is that the best predictor of health, wealth and happiness in adult life is not achievement in school. It's the number of years of schooling. So how can we make our schools more inviting places for kids to come to? And I don't have a great time for this notion of student engagement, because it puts the pressure on students need to be engaged. And my argument is no, schools need to be engaging. And if I have to say what the biggest problem I see, having come to Australia 3 years ago, is the same problem I saw in New Zealand 12 years ago. What's the percentage of kids that start high school, that finish high school? And it's interesting in my role at AITSL going around the various ministers, and I ask this question, and no one's actually given me an answer yet. They say, oh, it's very hard to calculate. Oh, I'd have to check it. Now, it's actually very easy to calculate, and it's very public. 1 in 5 don't make it. 20%. And if the biggest predictor is years in schooling, we do have a problem on our hands. And it's we've got, on the one hand, the issue of we've got cruising kids. On the other hand, we may not be as engaging. And primary schools, you're not off the hook because kids make that decision to stay in schooling around the age of 11, 12, 13. Let me look at another problem, and it's a bit of a setup for, excuse me, a bit of a setup for Noel Pearson, who's coming next. When I take NAPLAN, and I look at the distribution of Aboriginal kids and non-Aboriginal kids, I get graphs like that. And I challenge anyone to talk about the word Aboriginal underachievement. I think it's the most racist word I know. You can see the number of Aboriginal kids that are doing extremely well in our community. And yes, there are still issues. We have to change those curves. But I ask you not to consider words like closing the gap, because where is the gap? The gap that I particularly worry about is that gap up there, about how we can make our brighter Aboriginal students even greater beneficiaries of our education system, and how we as schools can be even better at teaching those kids. And I phrase it that way, not in terms of the kids are deficient, but how we can make a difference. And I certainly look at that and say, hey, in general, we're doing a pretty good job, but not good enough. And certainly, as I'm sure you're going to hear Noel say the same thing, there's an evidence base about what we do here to make this difference and to make those curves cruise in the right direction. And that's what we should be looking at, Not what one particular program or one particular method or one whatever, but how we can get more of our students, both below the average and above the average, to cruise that curve further up.